Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the first webinar in this Humanitarian Energy series titled State of Play, Sustainable Energy in Humanitarian Setting. This webinar will provide you a brief outline of the humanitarian energy settings and also briefly introduce the humanitarian energy nexus. Before we start the webinar, a quick tip. On the right side of your screen, you should have a box where you should be able to type your questions. Please use this box to type your questions. We want to make this webinar as interactive as possible, and therefore we'll collect all your questions and answer them towards the end of the webinar. In case you don't see a box, you should be able to see an orange arrow. If you just click on that arrow, a box will expand. And please use this to send us the question. So before we kickstart with the webinar, we want to know more about you, the audience. So now we're going to ask a poll question is going to pop up on your screen. Sorry, it's just. So now you should have a poll question on the screen saying, where are you based? Please use one of the options and tell us where are you currently logged in from. I will leave the question for a few more seconds. And now I'll close the poll question and quickly display the result. So we have a lot of speakers tuning in from Europe and Africa today. That's great to know. Now we'll have one more question that's popping on your screen. So please tell us, which sector do you work for? Are you working mostly for energy related sector, humanitarian sector, private sector, and so on? I will leave the poll for another 2-3 seconds. So now I will shortly close the poll in, let's say 5 seconds for now. And now I'll close the poll and display the results. So we have a lot of attendees listening who are working in humanitarian organization and energy, and also some from private sector. Welcome to everyone one more time. Now we have the last questions, and I promise this is the last before we introduce the speaker. Please tell us, where do you see yourself in terms of humanitarian energy? Are you a beginner who is starting out with the topic? Are you already working a lot, intermediate and expert, or you have no idea? Please choose one of the options. And again, I'll leave the poll online for let's say 20 more seconds. And the idea of this poll is to understand you, the audience, better, and this will also help us to fine-tune our other upcoming webinars. So it would be great if you could participate in the poll. And now I will close the poll and display the results. So we have a lot of our speakers who are beginning or intermediate, our attendees who are beginning and intermediate level. So thank you for taking part in our poll. And now we begin with our first presenter. So I would like to welcome Marco, who is going to be our first presenter. Marco has more than 15 years of experience in team coordination and project management, and he's currently the knowledge manager for ICRC Water and Habitat Unit at Geneva. Marco is today going to introduce the whole webinar series, why we are doing it, and is also going to quickly introduce the ICRC. Marco, the floor is yours. You should now be unmuted.
Thank you and good afternoon, everyone. I will introduce today's topic starting from a general overview on realities in the humanitarian context. According to the UN OCHA Global Humanitarian Review 2018, more than 130 million people in the world are today in need of humanitarian aid and protection. Natural disasters like recently in Mozambique, of course, contribute to this figure, but the main trigger of major crisis, displacement, suffering in general, remains linked to major conflicts and violence. It's the case in Afghanistan, South Sudan, Yemen, Iraq, Somalia, and so many other countries. Unfortunately, this list is very long, as well as the gap remains very wide between humanitarian needs and the global response capacity of the humanitarian system. But beside the magnitude of the crisis, we also need to consider their duration, as more and more what starts as an emergency continues for many years, transforming into long-term protracted crisis where entire government systems fail, denying the provision of essential services to many, of course, causing global instabilities and what we know as large displacements. If we consider today the 10 largest ICRC operations worldwide, the average length of stay for us in a country is 36 years. So you see how the duration is a very relevant factor. More recent crises like Libya and Syria started in 2011, Ukraine 2014, Yemen 15. We hope we'll never reach that age, but in meantime, humanitarian actors have to acquire the capacity to work from a different and long-term perspectives. Another trend concerns as well the environment in which this crisis happens, as battlefields continue to move to urban settings in heavily populated civilian neighborhoods, characterized by dependency on infrastructures for the delivery of essential services that require humanitarian agencies as well as donors to understand complex systems of interactions, work with long-term objectives, long-term forms of financing, and work hand in hand with authorities in charge. Still looking at the external environment in which we operate, also there are other trends, global trends like climate change, rapid urbanization, population growth, uneven distribution of wealth that further exacerbate the situation and radically transform the traditional humanitarian operating environment, where a traditional response would be based on provision of healthcare, food distribution, the traditional shelter, water, sanitation services. All this has today to evolve to answer to a broader range of vulnerability and new needs. So on one side, traditional emergency capacity must be maintained to be able to answer always quicker and quickly in emergencies and life-saving situation. But in parallel, we need to develop new competencies, new perspectives, and understand and also involve affected population with new and always relevant approaches. Next, please. Next, please. Thank you. About ICRC specifically, the International Committee of the Red Cross is at the origin of the Geneva Conventions and the International Red Cross and Red Crescent movement. The ICRC has been established in 1863, so we exist since more than 150 years, and we are present today in more than 90 countries. The ICRC is an impartial, neutral, independent organization with an exclusive humanitarian mission focused on protecting lives and dignity of victims of armed conflict and situation of violence, and to provide them with assistance. Now, within assistance, we look mainly at three sectors that are related to the provision of healthcare services, economic security, and water and habitat engineering programs. Why do we have a need for sustainable energy? Our growth over the last 8 years has been really remarkable, as we have almost doubled the size of our operations. And in doing this, we have been looking at the new needs and vulnerabilities I mentioned before. In this process, we need to develop technical capacity on power supply and use of renewable energies as pivotal in our strategy. And we consider this as initial step to work on all the other delivery of services, from food production and processing to health services, education, water supply, sanitation. Everything depends on energy. And power supply, this we'll see better also later in the presentation, but is addressed at two main levels. So on operation for household and infrastructures, and also at level of our assets for our own premises and structure. So the goal of this transversal effort is to accelerate an effective energy transition for the ICRC by improving access to safe, resilient, and sustainable energy, while also reducing ICRC operations environmental footprint. Our position on use of renewables give us as well some credibility to be increasingly engaged in policy discussions on climate, to flag how conflict-affected populations are particularly vulnerable to climate and environmental risks. Thank you, Ranisha. That was all from my side.
Thank you, Marco, for quickly setting the framework, quickly introducing ICRC. Now we have also a couple of presentations where we'll quickly talk about which are the organizations working in the humanitarian sector. First, we have François Delfos from Doctors Without Borders. François, you should be unmuted. Please go ahead. François? François, are you there? Hello, François. Since we're having some trouble hearing his voice, let's go ahead with the second introduction slide. And for second, we have Madeline from UNHCR. Maybe Madeline, you could go ahead and quickly talk about how is UNHCR active in the humanitarian setting. And once Francois is online, we go back to him.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, I'm Madeleine Marara from UNHCR Energy and Environment Unit. As I'm going to give a quick introduction on what is UNHCR and why do we need energy in our operation. As most of you know, UNHCR is the UN agency for refugees, having a core mandate to ensure international protection for refugee and other forcibly displaced population. So in addition to refugee, we also ensure protection for returnees, for internally displaced people that we call IDPs and stateless people. And we are operational in about 130 country and more than 400 locations. So in one country, we can have more than our presence is many locations. So in the figure below, I've kind of summarized, but this is not exhaustive, what are our activity in the field. So we go from coordinating assistance, humanitarian assistance during emergencies, to providing education, to ensuring that people have access to energy, to promoting livelihood for refugees, and so on. Next slide, please. Why do we need a sustainable source of energy? I divided our need of energy in two categories. Like my predecessor said, we have energy for our own need for UNHCR to be operational. So this includes running our offices, and as most of you know, our locations sometimes are in remote places, so we need to have staff accommodation for the staff, for UNHCR staff. So we also need a sustainable source of energy for them to continue to be operational. We also need a sustainable source of energy for meeting our protection mandates. Why am I saying that? I'm saying that because as I put energy in the center of all our activity, we cannot have a proper we cannot assure that our children, refugee children, have access to proper education if they don't have a reliable source of lighting for doing their homework and so on. We cannot have a health center running without a reliable source of energy. We also need a reliable, a sustainable source of energy to ensure that we we mitigate our environment and footprint, because if we don't have a clean energy, of course we don't mitigate our environment footprint. So in short, energy is at the center of all of our activity in the field. Over for me.
Thank you, Madeline. Next, we have Sergio from FAO. Sergio, please go ahead.
Good afternoon to everybody. Thank you and good afternoon to everybody. My name is Sergio Rivero. I work for the energy team here in FAO headquarters in Rome. I'll be giving you an overview of our activities in relation to sustainable energy in humanitarian settings. So the Food and Agriculture Organization leads international efforts to defeat hunger. So our goal is to achieve food security and make sure that all people have regular access to food and lead active, healthy lives. As part of this, we have a strategic objective of increasing resilience and livelihoods to threats and crises that affect agriculture, food, and nutrition. So, as part of this, we support communities prior, during, and after crisis. So energy in humanitarian settings is included as part of this objective of FAO, since energy is seen as an end. It's not seen as an end, but as a mean to improve food security. That is our main goal as FAO. Other of the important activities of FAO is the coordination, because we are part of the International Humanitarian Coordination System, and we co-chair the food security cluster together with the FFP, or sister organizations. So as part of this, we train partners, we monitor food security and associated challenges, and we establish strategies and support resource mobilization for response in humanitarian settings. So in relation to sustainable energy, so we can divide our activities in four related topics. And the first one is related to efficient use of energy. So to give you an example here, for example, in Nigeria, we are supporting the establishment of fuel efficient stove production centers. So efficient stoves are being produced here. We are supporting also the distribution of these fuel efficient stoves among affected population. And we are also providing training in fuel efficient cooking practices. A second activity will be the renewable bioenergy value chains, in which, for example, we have activities in Syria in which we support rural households in the construction of biodigesters that can provide biogas from cow manure for the production of energy for cooking. Other activity that we do here is the establishment of woodlots for the production of charcoal, efficient production of charcoal. And also we support activities producing alternative fuels, for example, briquettes from agricultural residues. As you can see, these two first activities are related to clean cooking. A third one will be the introduction of renewable energy solutions in agri-food chains. For example, the deployment of solar irrigation in for South Sudanese refugees in Uganda. This is a project that is currently ongoing. We also provide solar fridges for livestock vaccines in South Sudan for cooling the vaccines, and also the provision of solar PV systems for food safety laboratories. So this is the introduction of renewable energy solutions. And a final activity that we have is related to FAO infrastructure in this intervention. So, and this is related to energy efficiency and also deployment of solar solutions in the infrastructure that FAO is managing. So this is also to replace the use of diesel in this infrastructure. And here I can mention the examples of Djibouti and Nepal. And for example, we have solar PV systems feeding with power to veterinary labs in Liberia. So I have included also a link in this presentation that hopefully will be distributed among the participants. So here you can access a publication in which all of the programs from FAO are, you have a summary of all of the programs from FAO, and also there are links to have a more detailed information on each of these programs. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sergio. Next, we have Rafaela from World Food Program. Rafaela, please go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Raffaella Bellanca. I sit in the Climate and Risk Reduction Unit within WFP, and I work on energy from the programmatic viewpoint. WFP is quite big, maybe one of the biggest UN organizations in humanitarian operations. And the mandate is to deliver food. Traditionally is food assistance in emergency, but the realization that the money to face the crisis is always too little, and the need, as Sergio was saying in the beginning, is only going to increase. This realization has brought WFP to focus on keeping the focus on saving lives, but also looking at changing lives. So improving nutrition and build resilience in order to be more prepared for the emergencies and possibly also avoid them. What's the connection between food assistance and energy? Well, WFP has been engaging with cooking mainly in humanitarian situations for many years, since 2009, with the SAFE initiative. But recently we are looking at the food system as an opportunity for increasing resilience, and therefore looking at the whole value chain for food, so production and, as the colleague from FAO was saying, processing, of course, preservation is key to reach food security. Within that, our unit is cooperating quite closely with the school feeding program, which is one of the big operations within WFP, working in many countries with thousands of schools and reaching millions of children. We believe that the school can be an important entry point for innovation in general and energy in particular, and so we engaged with the other unit to develop synergies in this sense. A recent survey that we did run across WFP country offices, we received 57 answers, so not all the countries answered, but of those, 36 did report to be implementing energy activities, 106 different projects, which are of various focuses and interests, but it's quite interesting to know that there is much going on at the field level. Beside the programmatic focus on energy activities, there are actually two other units, engineering and environment, that look at the operations. So we have a program that started some years ago by which we collect all data on consumption and costs related to maintaining the operation of WFP in the field. And the aspiration is to hybridize our off-grid systems with solar systems. And that's a concept that is shared between engineering and the environment to increase efficiency of our operations and decrease the footprint. All from me.
Thank you, Rafaela. Next, we have Eva from IOM. Eva, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. So my name is Eva Mach from the International Organization for Migration, the IOM Geneva office. So what do we do as IOM? IOM is the UN agency mandated to work on migration matters. We are a UN-related organization since 2016, working on the field of migration, which includes operations addressing migration management challenges, but also humanitarian emergencies. So for example, in the case of migration management, we are talking about border management, assisting vulnerable migrants, also migration in the context of environmental and climate change. And in terms of humanitarian emergencies, IOM is leading the CCCM cluster in natural disaster context. We are also the second largest recipient of emergency WASH funding as of last year, and we have significant shelter and NFI programming as well. So IOM's mission is really to support states in meeting their operational challenges related to migration and migration management, and to uphold the well-being and human rights of migrants, including IDPs. We have more than 410 field locations as of last year, with 97% of our staff members based in the field. Our institutional thinking regarding sustainable energy really began under our environmental sustainability program, which was launched in 2017. But projects that somehow incorporated sustainable energy interventions really started since 2012. And our approach to incorporating sustainable energy has really three layers. So we are looking at this issue at the policy level, at the external and internal policy level. So we advocate to include energy considerations, especially renewable energy considerations, in external policy processes, and also to incorporate renewable energy or sustainable energy in our own internal policies and strategies. We do believe that policy change is needed to be able to scale up these interventions. So a lot of the focus of the past 2 years has been really directed to looking at how to achieve this. At the level of facilities and in terms of our own operations, that's the second level that we are looking at. We are interested to see how to transition to low carbon energy sources in our facilities and operations. So for example, how to reduce our reliance on diesel, especially in locations where it is a security requirement as well. So we have now an upcoming project in South Sudan where we are transitioning from diesel generators to solar system. And under this facility and operations area, we are also looking at how to improve our energy efficiency. And all of this work around facilities and operations is in line with the UN's Greening the Blue initiative that many of the other UN agencies are part of. So in terms of projects and programming, which is really the third layer of our approach, we are focusing on including and more accurately saying upscaling sustainable energy interventions in humanitarian operations, but also in migration management that might not be in humanitarian context. So in terms of concrete examples, which are linked to IOM's mandate, energy is really seen as an enabler to ensure the human rights of migrants and affected populations. So a right to healthy environment, right to water, right to shelter. So everything that basically previous colleagues have mentioned. So as concrete examples, for example, in the context of WASH, IOM is leading the Global Solar WASH initiative that is based in our regional office in Nairobi, which is a sector-wide initiative to really look into how to solarize WASH operations, mainly pumping. In terms of NFIs, for example, we have seen that Pico Solar, especially solar lanterns, have been on the rise since basically 2014. And another example could be the LPG distribution now in Cox's Bazar that again falls under NFIs and IOM is coordinating. In the context of migration management, which could also be in a humanitarian context, so our border management projects incorporate, most of them now incorporate renewable energy to power border posts and especially to provide backup power by using solar panels, so solar energy. So in brief, really our goal is to make a systematic change together with our partners, our UN partners, and also NGOs working on the field in line with our mission to support states and uphold the well-being and human rights of migrants. Thank you, over.
Thank you, Eva. We'll try one last time to get Francois online. So Francois, are you there? Can you hear? Oh, super. So we have...
Yeah.
So I'll just go back to the slides, and if you could quickly talk about your organization briefly, that would be great.
Okay, I'm sorry for the technical problem. So I'm François Delfos. I'm currently working on an environmental roadmap project at MSF Swiss headquarters here in Geneva. So very briefly about MSF, so International Independent Medical Humanitarian Organization. So we are mainly working in an emergency setting. 60% of our operational portfolio is in a conflict setting or unstable setting. So we mainly provide medical assistance to people affected by epidemics, conflict, disaster, exclusion from healthcare, and so on. The fact that we are obviously highly specialized in medical approach as per our nature and humanitarian work as well create what we believe an interesting synergy in our operational approach and so on. The very last point, maybe about just to give you an idea of the scale of the type of activity we run. So we currently run almost 500 projects in more than 70 countries worldwide. For instance, we did provide in 2017 10 million outpatient consultation. We did provide, for instance, 2 million vaccination for measles. So just to give you an idea of the type of activity and the scale of activity we can provide. And maybe a last point on what we do or what we aim to do is we would like to beef up our operational capacity through operational research and operational response, obviously, more directly to environmental mediated type of crisis, whether it be a natural disaster, epidemic, and so on. And we are trying to work now on building up a capacity to understand better the link of causality between environmental degradation, pollution, climate change, and the humanitarian crisis we can face. Next, please. Yes. So the need for sustainable energy. So maybe I would like to start with a quote from a colleague of us, who is saying basically that there is no the most environmental and economic energy is the one you don't use. Basically, so it's something that we really like to keep in mind as a core principle. But the main principle and the reason why we need sustainable energy is because the organization need urgently to address its own impact on the environment, and it's based on the principle of do no harm. By our own activity and operation, by providing humanitarian assistance to a vulnerable population, we must ensure at every level that we don't harm the environment, the population, the communities, the societies. So it's really a critical principle for MSF, and we believe that we have a social responsibility to take it seriously and to really manage our own environmental footprint when designing operation, when providing humanitarian assistance. So it's really about how do we deal with growth, how do we deal with modus operandi. We obviously are a patient-oriented organization, so whatever we are aiming at should not be in detriment of the beneficiaries and the patient. But nevertheless, we have to tackle this environmental footprint. So basically, we need to decrease our dependency to fossil fuel to find alternative. It's a lot about not only energy production, but obviously about energy consumption. It's a lot about behavior change inside the organization, just to make sure that we are in capacity to reduce our energy consumption. So we are talking here about efficiency and so on. And just a very quick last point related to this behavior change, because we believe that it's a real key challenge. MSF has a partnership with, is building up a partnership with ICRC, specifically dedicated to energy sensitization. So just to make sure that we are able, through our respective organization, increase the sensitization of our colleagues to energy consumption and therefore energy efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you, Francois, and also thank you to all speakers and to all people who are listening us. Please reach out to all of the speakers, because that's also one of the aim, that you get to see who, which of the organization are working in humanitarian sector and how, and please reach out to them. We'll circulate the email address with the slides later on. And now we have one more poll before we go into the second part of the webinar, where we will talk in deep about what is the humanitarian energy nexus. So we have now one poll that will now be displayed on your screen. So please tell us what is the most relevant energy solution for your operation. If you are working with either humanitarian energy or only in energy sector, is it household electricity, improved cook stoves, and so on. So since the polls are coming up, I'll leave it for another 20 more seconds. And in the meantime, I encourage everyone, please send us your questions and we will try to get all of them answered today. And if not, we'll also try to document it. And all of this information will be available to you after the webinar, including the webinar recording. So now I will close the poll and display the result. So we see most of our attendees are mostly working with electricity for social infrastructure, followed by improved cooking solutions and household electricity. Thank you for taking part in our poll. Now we move into the second part of the webinar, where we talk about a humanitarian energy nexus, and I like to welcome Owen. Owen has been working with Chatham House since May 2014 and has co-authored many leading publications. Owen, the floor is yours. And you need to unmute yourself. Much. Yes, we can hear you now.
Yes, and thank you all for having me. It's really a pleasure to speak here. So yes, I'm aware my time is very short and I have to cover the whole of the energy transition and what it means for humanitarian agencies. So I'm going to dive right in, and if you could move on the slideshow, that would be wonderful as well. So many of us here will be familiar with SDG 7, the Sustainable Development Goal around energy. And that's the commitment to achieving affordable, reliable, and modern energy services for all by 2030. So we know from the latest reports of SE for All that the world is making progress towards this goal. But at the current rate of ambition and achievement, we're going to fall significantly short of our targets. And that's true for many aspects of energy services, whether that's cooking, lighting, penetration of renewables, efficiency, etc. And Lisa, have we got the PowerPoint?
Hello, Owen.
Hello, have we got the PowerPoint?
Hello, Owen. The PowerPoint should be online now.
Okay, I can only see the poll screen. Ah, there we go. Okay, so yes, if we could go back one slide, that would be wonderful. Okay, I'm going to continue. I can't actually see the PowerPoint on my screen, but I can see a slide in the middle of it. Here we go. Yes. So yes, as I was mentioning, Figure 1 shows the latest progress in sustainable energy development goal 7. But I think more broadly, and the broad point I want to make is that it's certainly true that the world is changing as we move away from combustible fossil fuel resources towards more renewable energy resources. And Figure 2 that you can see there illustrates that trend. Bloomberg New Energy Finance, for example, estimates that around 3/4 of the expected $10 trillion in investment in new power generating capacity is going to be renewable. And if you could go to the next slide, Lisa. And so as this happens, we see the cost of renewable technology continuing to fall as well. And this creates a virtuous cycle, as you can kind of see in Figure 4. And of course, I should mention it's not just renewable energy technology, it's also batteries as well. Okay, thank you. And maybe we can go on one more. Yes, perfect. And of course, you can't really talk about the energy transition without talking about climate change as well. So many of the big drivers behind the renewable energy revolution that I've just described are really rooted in the policies and the practices that stem out of a concern to protect against climate change and to limit global temperature increases. But of course, climate change itself is going to profoundly alter the nature of humanitarian action in the coming decades. So overexploitation of natural resources, desertification, deforestation, dwindling water resources. We're seeing these things causing migration and conflict already, for example, in Sahel, in Lake Chad area, and many of its impacts are going to keep getting worse. So the map that was on the previous slide gave just one indication of how climate change could affect food security, with the dark red areas in the previous slide illustrating the areas that were most vulnerable to food insecurity. But equally, you know, I could have shown you a map of forest fires or deforestation or desertification. And all of these have a major bearing on the security and the safety of vulnerable populations around the world. And I guess really the major point to emphasize is that it's likely that it's the poorest sections of the world that are going to be least able to adapt to these changes and that are going to feel the effects the strongest. Thank you. Can we go to the next one? The energy transition is also going to have huge geopolitical consequences. So many of the countries that are hosting the highest numbers of refugees and IDPs are fossil fuel dependent for their energy supply. But as you can see in the table on the right-hand side, they also have very high unharnessed potential for solar and other renewable energies. Next, please. Figure 7, in fact, kind of lists all of those countries hosting the highest numbers of refugees and displaced people. And there are a number of countries listed here with really huge energy access issues. Can we go on? Yemen, South Sudan, Nigeria, for example. But even those listed as having 100% energy access, countries like Lebanon and Jordan, they have huge issues with reliability, with affordability, and the quality of supply. So there's really a big opportunity for renewable energy interventions to support host country ambitions around moving towards renewable energy and around decreasing their dependence on fossil fuel supply. So I guess the key question that we're all here to think about is how can humanitarian agencies help? And maybe, Lisa, if it's okay, we can do the next slide first and then come back to this one. Because I think, the truth is that many agencies have been slow to recognize their role in this movement. And yes, thank you. And indeed, we can say that agencies have, at least to some extent, been unwittingly contributing to the problems. So we at Chatham House did some research last year that showed that roughly 5% of humanitarian budgets are being spent on diesel and related costs. And in some places, like in South Sudan, the current spending on diesel and petrol is quite astronomical. And that's because agencies are reliant on generators to power their operations, their facilities, and their equipment. And the majority of people I spoke to as part of my research suggested that really there was a kind of huge hidden problem around dependence on diesel and well below optimum standards of efficiency as the norm for building efficiency, generator use, and fleet management. But I am quite positive that this is starting to change, and I think that's partly evidenced by calls like this one. The previous slide around do no harm showed that many agencies are saying very progressive things around energy and environmental standards. And I really enjoyed Francois' presentation where he talked about the need to link this to the do no harm agenda, which I think is really the right way to look at this issue. So, aside from this basic imperative, I think, the basic responsibility of humanitarian agencies to take these things into account, there's also some specific reasons how agencies can, or why they should link to better provision of energy. And the next 5 slides show some of the major links between energy and other sectors. So I think most of what I've displayed in the next 5 slides is quite self-explanatory, and we really don't have much time. So I'm going to go through quite quickly, and anybody is welcome to ask me questions about the aspects of the presentation I touch upon. So in regards to energy and gender, some of the presenters have touched on this slightly already. Much of the early impetus around energy programming was around the need to improve cooking solutions so that women and girls weren't exposed to as much risk by having to walk so far outside the camp to collect firewood, etc. And some of the research that we've done in my organization has shown that this is still a huge problem. Shocking levels of violence are reported. And this is certainly an area that needs a lot more research and a lot more work on the ground. But I guess the one thing I want to highlight from this slide is that there is a complex relationship between energy and gender. The most prevalent type of gender-based violence is still intimate partner violence. So it's a complex relationship, and it's one that needs a lot of care. And we need to think about how energy programs can be designed with a gender-sensitive lens. So next, please. Okay, so energy and health. The reasons why energy is important for health, I'm just going to skip through them, and we can pick up on any things that are important in discussion. But I guess most obviously, clinics and hospitals are able to use more facilities with energy. They're able to light clinics and hospitals with energy. They're able to store medicines. They're able to have better maternal care and obstetrics. ICT operations around clinics can be improved with access to energy. All of these things are very important. And of course, then as well, there are many kind of non-explicitly medical linkages, for example, around respiratory health and street lighting for safety, water treatment, etc. Next, please.
Orvin, since we are going over time, would it be possible to sum up the next slides? And then we can always come
Yes,
back
of
to
course.
the discussion. Okay.
Yeah, of course. I don't think actually we particularly need to continue. We can. I've outlined the major connections between energy and each of the aspects in the slides. So if there are things that people want to pick up on, then we can do that afterwards. I think, you know, the basic summary point is that energy can improve a whole range of other social services that are really valuable for humanitarian settings. And this is a great entry point for humanitarian agencies to do things better in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Orvin. That was really helpful. And thank you for giving us a quick overview of how energy is related to different aspects and also sharing results from your research. And we'll definitely touch upon them during the discussion section. Now I would like to welcome our another presenter, Thomas Forgrab from UNITAR. He's the coordination unit, he's the head of the coordination unit for the Global Plan of Action. And he's going to today present the Global Plan of Action. Thomas, the floor is yours. Could you unmute yourself, Thomas?
Yes, sorry.
Yes.
Thank you, Renisha. Good afternoon to all of you. Good morning, wherever you are. It's my pleasure to be on this webinar today, and thank you for all my previous and fellow speakers before. And I'd like to touch upon what where basically Owen stopped. And Owen pointed out already that there are some great opportunities coming with renewables and energy transition in the humanitarian activities. But I would like to I would go one step back and explain why isn't it happening. And we figured out that there are 5 key challenges in the sector, and they're listed on your screen, and I'll go from left to right. And first key challenge is energy is not a priority. There's no, for example, energy cluster in the humanitarian system. The priorities certainly are provide water, food, and shelter. But we heard already from Rafaela and Laurent that, of course, it is linked, and energy is a key enabler for these priorities of the humanitarian assistance. Second key challenge, humanitarian settings are not included in national or international energy access agendas. Usually, displaced populations are living in areas where there's not enough resources for the host communities, and usually also the host communities, for example, don't have access to energy. Third one is around funding, investment, especially when we talk about replacing diesel generators. It's often required quite a high capital upfront before you can actually gain the savings. Or if you look at the cooking side of it, it usually is quite expensive to provide efficient cooking program, for example, or cook stove program. So, but there is already there's funding in the sector, and of course we also need to think about how to spend this money more wisely. And of course, diesel generators are not the most efficient solution nowadays. Fourth one, expertise. There's limited expertise in the field. Just to give you a small example, UNHCR has roughly 16,000 staff, and out of these 16,000, there are about 10 real energy expert positions in this whole organization. So just to give you an idea of what we're talking about in the field. And fifth one, and this is not only related to energy, this is a common issue in the humanitarian settings. There's only limited data, and on the other hand, we have many pilot projects out there where there's a little limited sharing of data as well. And so we definitely need to work on this altogether. Next slide, please. Thank you. And if we say we, then I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Global Plan of Action. The full title is actually Global Plan of Action for Sustainable Development, Sustainable Energy Solutions in Displacement Settings. And we started this process in January last year and developed within the following 6 months until July last year a framework document, which we now call in short the GPA. And the idea of the GPA, or the vision of the GPA, is related to SDG 7, which Owen already pointed out. So our vision is every person affected by conflict and natural disaster has access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy service by 2030. And in order to do so, I think one of the key takeaways is we need to collaborate. And that's why we started a multi-stakeholder process back in last year. Basically, everybody open for everyone, every organization, every individual who is interested in working on this topic. So it's very inclusive. We are running working groups, which I will explain in a minute. We have many different agencies within our network. Everything is needs-based and it's multi-sectorial. That means it's not our aim to create a new energy cluster, but it's our aim to mainstream sustainable energy solutions into the different humanitarian clusters. Next slide, please. Thank you. I mentioned we have 5 working areas, and these are related, as you can imagine, related to the challenges. And working area 1, I go clockwise, is around planning and coordination. So how can we support humanitarian agencies and NGOs in mainstreaming their energy, sustainable energy solutions in their own operations, for example. And here I want to highlight that we are organizing currently the first Humanitarian Energy Conference in the last week of July in Addis. The registration is still open for a few more days, so please join us if you can. Second working area, policy and advocacy. There we are trying to, for example, this is just to give you an idea of what we are working on in these working areas. We'd like to start a dialogue with host countries how to include displaced populations into the national grid extension plans, for example. Working area 3, we are running a series of workshops in July on how to replace diesel generators, and that's not only related to a technical issue, but it's also related to procurement, to finance, and other topics that are had to be dealt with in that sense. Working area 4, technical expertise, capacity building and training. For example, this series of webinars, which I'm really grateful for our collaboration with Energypedia and ICRC, is part of this effort to increase the technical expertise in the field. And the fifth one, data. Together with other partners, we are thinking about how to come up with a common set of indicators, with a common set of assessment tools, and we're looking around standards in the sector. So it's also again a large topic. Next slide, please. How to get involved? Again, we are open for everybody. You can see on the slide, we have a generic email address, energy@unitar.org. You can send your requests to that, then we can guide you to the 5 working groups. And also, if you have certain ideas in mind already, you can find the email addresses from the team, Mark, Amy, and Susie, and just send them an email and we'll get back to you. Next, please. These are the current members of the GPA steering group. And of course, we would like also to thank our donors, the German Federal Foreign Office, Norwegian Capacity Development, NORCAP, and the IKEA Foundation. Thank you. That's from my side. Over to you.
Thank you, Thomas. Now we have Sergio from International Committee of the Red Cross ICRC, and he's going to give an example from ICRC. Sergio, the floor is yours.
So hello, thanks Uranisha. Welcome to all of you. I'll try to catch up speed since I see we have gained some delay. And the idea of my presentation is to show how the ICRC has gone through it's going through its own energy transition, what are the key challenges and ambitions and approach we're putting in place, and ending with a case study from the Gaza Strip in order to see how all these pieces that also my colleagues have mentioned come together. Next slide, please. So just to start to recall some operational patterns that have been mentioned already and try to summarize them, we have the protracted nature of conflicts, we have global urbanization, we have the impact of climate change and the transformation of the digital sphere. And so we realize that there is a broader range of vulnerabilities that we need to address and that require that we to adapt our response. Given our operational context and global gaps in energy access, the main challenge for the ICRC is embedded in our ambition of harnessing sustainable energy services for crisis-affected people while ensuring carbon neutral operational growth. It seems like a conceptual contradiction. On top of this, the Beckman, I'm not finished with the other slide, just on top of this to mention that the energy system is undergoing unprecedented change. We recognize the environmental concerns and the economics of competing renewable energy sources that challenge our current business model and make them obsolete. So there's this call for change. Next one, please. Internally, for the ICRC, we recognize two main drivers. We have the ICRC strategy and our framework for sustainable development. And we're trying to build the whole narrative for our energy transition upon these documents. From our institutional strategies, we have five main orientations. We have influencing behaviors by strengthening ICRC collection and use of evidence. We have building relevant and sustainable impact with people affected by ensuring relevance and sustainability again of humanitarian response and strengthening the resilience of people affected and leveraging on our own ability to address the new needs and consequences of conflict and climate change. Third pillar, working with others to enhance impact. So it's by increasing our capacity of building communities of practice and expertise on energy access and by engaging with a diverse range of stakeholders that we can ensure impact-driven investment for the future. Then, an internal perspective, creating an inclusive and diverse working environment so that we ensure that ICRC staff can maintain a spirit of initiative and innovation. Last but not least, it's embracing the digital transformation by increasing the digital opportunities for accessibility and engagement for people affected and other audiences so that we can learn how energy is used and accounted for and adapt our response again. All of this is feeding also our sustainable development framework that promotes environmental, social, and economic responsibility that strengthen our orientation towards a sustainable impact. Next slide, please. So we see the external challenges and how we are influenced by all these external elements, but on the other hand, we recognize also a clear opportunity for the ICRC. Since we have an active role in building the resilience of essential services in high conflict areas and conflict-prone zones. So we have a privileged position to think long-term and integrate energy access and resilience into our core relief to recovery operations and design energy delivery models for crisis-affected people. So I'm just anticipating the idea of energy delivery models. Today, we recognize, as our colleagues have stated, that the whole concept of humanitarian energy is quite difficult to address, as it sits at the nexus of energy access, environmental and climate policy, and humanitarian aid. But we can see here the clear link with broader developmental goals. And so we have, through this transition, the opportunity to shape the future and bridge the existing silos along the humanitarian development continuum. Next, please. So once we have framed the background and we have tried to understand the environment we work in, we try to see how we can internally integrate all these elements and design a long-term roadmap. We carried out a baseline analysis in 2018 that was showing that while we have an increasing number of projects related to energy, we also face challenges such as lack of data and engineering expertise, internal coordination, or even budget limitations for long-term investment. The roadmap we are designing that is being rolled out addresses these challenges, but at the end, leveraging on ongoing energy projects to capture their scalability to foster and accelerate our energy transition. So to say that the energy transition is happening, and we are quite positive to be able to frame it and accelerate it within our organization. Next slide, please. So we see all of the challenges we have internally, and looking back at what were the bottlenecks, we identified three major work streams. Building evidence on energy use. So we know that to create a robust organization, energy policy, we require, of course, a high-level support, but we need also to have evidence for short-term success. And this evidence can be produced by making real-time energy supply and consumption patterns available to inform our own programs and our own asset management. We know as well that if we explore more deeply the consumpting, productive, and public energy use, and we collect market data, this can lead us to improve collaboration with those donors, those impact investors, and private sector actors that are looking into sustainable energy investment. So there's a whole new environment to start working with. Again, if we look more closely to the three work streams we have, and looking into changing behaviors and challenging normal practices, as our colleagues from MSF were saying, that the most environmental and economic energy is the one we don't use. So we are looking to integrate behavior-based efficiency programs that are proven to be the most cost-effective strategies on the market. From an energy planning perspective, the market-based approach and the private sector can offer opportunities that lead to deliver sustainable energy solution, leverage capital and expertise. So there we can find additional opportunities. Of course, I would start mentioning at this stage that new financial tools can accelerate any energy transition from an institutional perspective. As an example, we see already, and I think Chatham House, GPA, and many of our colleagues have quite speaking cases from the field. We know that access to credit and cash transfer can increase the household purchasing power and hence support that portion of the market that cannot afford nowadays for this service. Last but not least, investing for long-term change and access external finance again. Indeed, on the long term, our energy transition will require to reform the way our budget are structures so that country offices, our operations in the field can be supported more in an easier way in making those investments towards those initial investments towards renewable supply. Until then, in any case, we already know that there's a high potential for cost savings. And so any existing energy use can be designed to self-finance. We're thinking about. All of this to say, again, it's a matter of putting in place an innovative approach to the way we respond to the humanitarian needs. Although these three main work streams that we saw before are complementary, they, by their nature, evolve according to our institution's transition readiness. And they depend on our capacity to integrate new technical and financial partnerships in order to promote energy as a key enabler to assess the breakdown of system and strengthen resilient operations. Just to recall the main objectives of our roadmap. From a high-level process, if we look at these three complementary work streams, we realize that there's a need for a centralized mechanism to capture the complexity of the energy transition for the institution and its operation and asset management. And we need to value the capabilities across operation and asset management in order to streamline and accelerate our transition. Next slide, please. So again, I've mentioned many times we need to work with others. And if we look at the specific objectives we have in our roadmaps and the high-level outcomes that we foresee, we call for, there's really a new partnership culture that we need to promote across the organization. And this, of course, needs to be addressed at different levels, from a leadership and strategy point of view, having a clear vision and rationale for partnering with others. We need also to develop systems and processes in order also to monitor how these partnerships are performant or not. And of course, this requires an investment on the skills of our staff in terms of negotiating and trust building and integrating specific tools and guidelines. So again, there is at the baseline, at the core of the energy transition, there is this new ambition to move from transactional relationships, maybe the ones we have been used to work, outsourcing services, to real partnership where there's a really what we call a co-created value and sharing of risk. Next slide, please. So again, just to summarize a little bit before we move to the field, to the field experience. Again, we were setting up a central energy team who has the task to design and roll out these energy delivery models and explore new financial mechanisms to accelerate an effective energy transition for our operations and our asset management. In terms of definitions, I will recall the work from Rafaela defining energy delivery models. So it's a combination of the technology, finance, again, new financial mechanisms, management activities, policy support, legal arrangements, and relationship types required to supply energy to our target beneficiaries. And of course, what we're trying to do in this sense is to keep a people-centered approach. So trying to build a response upon a detailed understanding of our end users' needs and their wants and the specific context we are working in. So I would finish this part trying to recall what all of our colleagues have shared with us, and I would like to quickly share with the whole audience this case study in Gaza that shows how really, again, the energy transition is happening at a different pace and a different pattern in different settings, but it's happening out there. So here you see a picture of Gaza, and this picture shows the maintenance efforts of a wastewater treatment plant. And we have been supporting this for many years. It is important because we try to support service providers to avoid that the level of service degrades to a point that it can trigger a public health crisis. And we are not the only ones. As a crisis strikes in Gaza, the whole humanitarian system replaces and donates. New projects are proposed as a solution to the crisis. But then another crisis happening. And so it seems in this environment, it's a perpetuation of aid dependency. And so we're trying to understand in this context, how can we change this dynamic? How can we break the wheel? Next, please. You have a picture of all the services we have been mapping in Gaza and the recurring crisis cycle and all the aid that is delivered to the Gaza Strip. Next slide, so we can get into. So what we decided to do, it was actually to carry out, since 2018, a multi-sectorial area-based assessment aimed at enhancing the resilience of the infrastructure system. So trying to understand the resilience of the whole infrastructure that is present in Gaza. It was trying to have a look at land use, groundwater use, water quality, power, food, and all the rest, all the information that we were able to capture around the Gaza Strip. And this allowed us to understand how all this infrastructure is interconnected. So we have approximately 400 elements and their dependencies across one another. Speaking easier, it's to run a pump, you need a cable, you need a power net, which needs fuel during a power cut, which needs people, and all the rest. And so we try to map all of this. Next picture, please. Putting them all together and monitoring this, we really realized that energy is the key bottleneck. So we see that diesel electricity user is the element we should work on in order to multiply the positive impact of our operations. We use this model to really look at what we call feedback loops. What are they? Very simple. To make it very simple, it's how a chain of causes and effects feed itself, either with positive or negative consequences. It's a loop. And so we try to understand this in order to identify how we could multiply, of course, those positive ones. Next slide, please. So we went out. You can keep the two pictures clear. I mean, I think they speak clear enough. So we went out in the Gaza Strip and tried to understand how we could test our assumptions, what were to find and highlight all the elements that were participating to this feedback loop process. And we saw a lot of things there. We discovered a whole world. We could see so many installations and so many positive coping mechanisms, and we started seeing opportunities everywhere to connect all of these dots. Next slide, please. So we came out identifying what we can call the basic elements of diffuse power systems. Here you see what is the external input needed to generate, control, distribute power, so to reach that list of outputs at the very end. And so really trying to understand what are people using nowadays, what is already existing and what works. Next slide, please. Next picture. So we put them all together and we try to understand how can we promote and scale up these energy delivery models. What are those ones that produce the greatest public health impact, the win-win situation? And here you see some of them in those gray areas. Of course, when a strike occurs, last picture, we will see that some services will go down, some neighborhoods will go dark, some water will stop flowing. But again, we might have created those gray islands that can still continue working in autonomy for a little while maybe, but of course they will recover faster. Last slide. So we realized that we have to start working in a different environment. It's not any longer informal setting, shelters or camps, but it's apartments, it's urban settings with individual households connecting to smart meters and maybe a more advanced technology, but not more challenging. In these pictures, you can summarize, for example, a key example of a negative feedback loop you see somebody just connecting to the grid with a lot of people having done the same. And then you see a final example of a positive feedback loop. And we believe there is a way, and we're trying to promote this new way of working in these challenging contexts, to promote these positive feedbacks in order to build up and scale up our response upon existing coping mechanisms. So thanks, Ranisha. I speeded up, but I'm finished, and I hope we have still some time for questions so that we can exactly learn from our audience as well.
Thank you. That was really quick and you sticked on the time. So thank you so much for that. And also thank you for presenting experience from Gaza. Now we move to the question and answer section, and we have a lot of questions pouring in from our audience. So I'm going to kickstart with the first question. And the first question is, as we know, energy access has high investment cost and short-term budget. And this was highlighted in by both our presenters, Owen and as well as Sergio. So what can a humanitarian organization do about it so that they make it a long-term project and not short-term focus? And what is already being done about it? So if Sergio, you can start, you can first start the answer, and maybe after you, Owen, can touch upon it.
Okay, thank you, Ranisha, for giving me summarizing. I mean, the key points with this question. So actually, we know we have mentioned many times the challenges that all organizations are facing. And again, I think it's not a matter of inventing something new for each organization. It's just a matter of dealing with energy in a systematic way. So from our side, we realize that we have more and more energy-related projects, and they're scattered all over our operational areas with really innovative solutions that can be scaled up. But we need to frame all of these efforts. We need to recognize the key role of energy in addressing the new challenge in terms of needs that we have from now on for the future. And of course, you mentioned another key element. It's how can we finance these investments? The words itself, for me, investments, recalls to a long-term perspective. And that's, I think, where we're trying to work the most internally with the ICRC, recognizing that we are present in many areas over decades. And so this gives us the opportunity to integrate long-term thinking since the onset of the emergency. I like to build a little bit the parallel with water. It's not that during an emergency you can supply those minimum 20 liters of water per person per day, but we do that stepwise, 3 liters, 5 liters, 10 liters over time. Same thing, same approach we need to integrate in the energy field, but over a longer term perspective, and just breaking the way we are structured nowadays in financing over 12 months. And really start, as we say, looking for investment on the longer term. I don't know if anybody else wants to add on this. I think it's a quite rich topic.
Thank you. I'm pretty sure, Owen, would you like to add something to that? Since you have a lot of experience in this field. Owen, are you there?
Hi there. Hello. Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, I'd echo Sergio's point about the importance of kind of thinking beyond 1 year budgets. I think that's the single most important thing that can change. I guess one thing that might be worth highlighting, and maybe Rafa should say more, Rafaela from WFP, is a number of agencies are thinking of kind of innovative ways to structure their own financial incentives. So for example, WFP have an energy efficiency program and an internal carbon tax. So essentially you kind of impose a carbon levy on the vehicle fleet when you purchase new vehicles, and you use that, and that money accrues to a central fund, and then the central fund can be distributed to country offices as grants or loans to cover the upfront cost of new renewable energy investments. That's just one example, but I think the broader point is that yes, we need to move beyond kind of thinking through one-year budgets and actually start to recognise the long-term financial savings that would accrue through renewable energy projects. Thank you.
Thank you, Owen. Thank you for pointing to us Rafaela's direction, because the next question is directed to Rafaela. The question is, World Food Programme supports school canteen programs which normally uses wood. Would it be possible to shift to other sustainable energy such as briquettes? Could you shed some light on it?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. It is actually at the core of what we are trying to do with the school feeding program. And I would say more. So obviously, whatever improvement can be made is welcome, and alternative fuels or if more efficient cooking appliances are always the first step. I think time has come for us to look at cleaner ways of cooking. So wherever possible, I hope that we can opt for modern solutions with non-biomass based cooking systems. We are looking with lots of interest at e-cooking, so electric cooking powered by solar. It's at the edge, so this is very experimental phase, but I do believe that hopefully that's how the future will look like. Briquettes are a fairly complex beast. So in order to produce briquettes that are affordable, have the same performance as charcoal, and are found with the same distribution network as charcoal, you need really lots of investment. As my colleagues at FAO will teach us, you really need to make sure that all that raw material that we have the impression is out there really is, because sometimes that's not the case at all. So yeah, said that, there are certainly cases in which briquettes can be an opportunity.
Thank you so much. I want to take one last question because we only have 3 more minutes, and this question is to actually Sergio from FAO, and it would be great if you could answer in like less than 1 minute. I know I'm putting you on pressure. The question is, does FAO has experience in marketed approaches to humanitarian energy? So are there any programs that are market-based? If you could just answer this in like very shortly, that would be great. Sergio?
Yes, hello. This is Florent. I just joined Sergio here for the end of the webinar. So yeah, as it was explained, we are very traditional humanitarian agency. So in the sense that we started first by distributing fuel efficient stoves, and more we moved to more like private-led models. In the sense that, for instance, in Nigeria, we are setting up fuel efficient stove production centers. So we help the startup phase, and then afterwards the management of these stove production centers can market themselves the stoves that are produced by the centers. But because it's difficult conditions, so it's in northeast Nigeria in the Borno state, we help them to set up the infrastructure, and we help them on choosing the right model for the stove that is adapted to local conditions. But then after some point, it's for themselves to market and to sell the stoves themselves. So this is the first example of us trying to have more market-led approaches. And then
sorry, Florent.
yeah.
I'll have to cut you there because we only have
Okay.
one more last minute. So sorry about that. Thank you so much to everyone who sent in your questions. We will send this question to all the speakers and try to get some answers and document it on Energypedia, and we'll really try to do that. So as this is my final slide, so I want to thank you to all speakers for taking part in the webinar and to all attendees for listening to us. And there was one question if there was further resources. So on your screen, you can see links to other resources, website publications that's helpful for you. We'll also put this online on Energypedia documentation, please. So please go and have a look at it. And lastly, if you have any feedback, any suggestion, please send us info@energypedia.info. And as mentioned before, we will make all the recording and webinar document online afterwards. Thank you so much and have a good day. Thank you.